In this lecture, we will be talking about Emil Durkheim, his life, as well as the work, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Durkheim is one of the founders of sociology. As I said in previous lectures, the main three founders of sociology are considered to be Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emil Durkheim. Durkheim is important in sociological history, largely because he was the first to institutionalize sociology at a university. Durkheim was born in 1858 in northern France. He came from a family of rabbis, though he was quite secular. He was heavily influenced by Auguste Comte, who we discussed earlier in this year, particularly Comte's understanding of positivism in sociology, as well as a form of social harmony through a functionalist lens. Although Durkheim was French, he also spent a good deal of time in Germany, perhaps most notably in the East German city of Leipzig. He was criticized for some of his views on religion, particularly his view that religion is an eminently social matter, rather than putting his analysis of religion in theological and divine terms. Politically, it is known that he had some socialist sympathies, and he died of a stroke in 1917. Today, he is buried in Paris. The elementary forms of religious life is an analyzing religious beliefs and practices amongst Indigenous Australians. He wants to select a context that is very different from his own context of early 20th century France, as doing so allows Durkheim to better understand some of the fundamental or definitional qualities of religion. It is in this large book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, in which Durkheim makes the case that religion is an eminently social matter, even if it may seem like a supernatural matter. So, in chapter 1 of book 1, Durkheim makes the case that if we are to understand what religion is, we must try to free ourselves of our own preconceptions. We do not want any sort of values that we have from our preconceptions to impose on our understanding of what makes religion what it is. He tries to understand what is fundamental and definitional to all religion, not qualities of religion that could be confounded by certain contextual particularities, but what are the basic attributes that make religion what it is across time and across space. He first dismisses the idea that a belief in supernatural qualities could be a possible aspect of religion's fundamental definition, because he claims that the supernatural elements of religion came about late in the history of religions, that they are not actually fundamental to religion as a definition. He talks about how ideas of gods and spirits are not necessarily common to all religions, pointing out the example of Buddhism. It is worth stating that there's, of course, varieties to Buddhism, though he claims that he analyzes the fact that Buddhists have a sort of atheistic component to them in their denial of gods and spirits. However, this is not true of all Buddhists, and in all cases, there are certainly examples of Buddhism where there is a supernatural connection taking place. Though he claims that these forms of Buddhism go against some of the authoritative sources of sociology of religion, particularly sociology of religion focused on Eastern religions. So religion is something broader than if the supernatural element is not definitional to all religion across time and space, then religion is broader than a mere belief in God and spirits. A distinct definition is thus demanded of Durkheim. So he makes this case that there is a distinct trait that rests in religious belief, that is a distinction between there being a sacred and a profane. The sacred and profane realms are separated in religious thought, and in making this the case for this division of thought, I'm going to briefly read from page 38. As I have tried to establish, sacred things are different in nature from profane things. If they are different in their essence, the problem is far more complex. In that case, one must ask what led man to see the world as two heterogeneous and incomparable worlds, even though nothing in sense experience seems likely to have suggested the idea of such a radical duality. Then turning over, that was on page 39. I'm going to also turn to going to go backwards now, apologies for that, to page 38, where he writes about this topic saying, but characteristically the religious phenomena is such that it always assumes a bipartite division of the universe, known and unknowable, into two genera that include all that exists, but radically exclude one another. Sacred things are things protected and isolated by prohibitions. Profane things are those things to which prohibitions are applied and that must keep at a distance from what is sacred. Religious beliefs are those representations that express the nature of sacred things and the relations they have with other sacred things or with profane things. Finally, rites are rules of contact that prescribe how man must conduct himself with sacred things. So, in describing religion's social dimension, Durkheim makes the case that religious belief systems are shared by social groups, and religious belief systems also have the function to be able to unify these social groups who collectively share the same beliefs. The individuals within this group feel joined to one another, feel a sense of unity among each other through their common faith. A social group who consists of members who imagine a sacred world and its relation, in a particular relation that the sacred world has with the profane world, can be referred to as a church, especially when there are certain practices that correspond to this shared belief system concerning the relationship between the sacred and the profane. He discards the possibility of magic being considered a religion, for it might refer to sort of spiritual matters, but it does not do anything to unify a group, as he claims there is no church of magic. He thus arrives to the following definition of religion that you could find on page 44. A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. Turning to chapter 3 in book 2, Durkheim makes the case that religions have a system of beliefs that embrace the universality of things in the world. Some of the inherent qualities of totems that are used in religious rituals are not relevant to the meaning assigned to them, though there are some intrinsic qualities of objects that lead to the duality classifications we were talking about in the previous slide. There are also there's a hierarchy in value that is demonstrated through the classifying of certain objects to certain meanings, the totemic classifications, and he reminds us that hierarchies are inherently social. So a totem is an object that represents the clan collectively. He tells us that no two clans can have the same totem. Totems that he points to among the Australian Aborigines include certain types of pebbles, kangaroos, certain types of trees, etc. There is a sacred character that these clans assign to the object. The sacred character is embodied in what appear to be sort of everyday objects. Clans that have different totems are not necessarily in conflict with one another, however. There's not necessarily a battle between these two clans. For example, he says that the clans that use crows as a sacred totem do not feel any sort of negative emotions toward the clan that has snakes as their most sacred totem, and actually believes that the snake is truly the object for that clan, and that they are not necessarily engaging in an incorrect religious ritual. It is a totem that is representative of that separate clan, whereas the clan of the crows believe that neither group is necessarily wrong, but that the crow better represents their social group. No two clans use the same totem to represent the same thing. Durkheim says that this is not coincidental, but rather it shows a type of cooperation between the clans. So rather than what one might suspect, that these clans are in conflict with one another, they have actually organized and systematized their totems so that there is no repetition between them, showing a type of cooperation. The representation of all things in the universe is divided among the totems that they select. In chapter 7 of book 2, Durkheim lets us know that totems are the symbol of the clan's collective identity. The clan, unbeknownst to them, is actually worshiping the clan itself. They are worshiping their own identity, even though they might believe that they are worshiping the supernatural or sacred world. Society, Durkheim tells us, has the ability to bring about beliefs concerning the supernatural. The nature of society and the way that society operates is obviously much different from the way in which the individuals operate, an individual nature. But it does depend upon the cooperation of individuals. Society must have the cooperation of individuals. When we submit to certain norms and certain social rules that we kind of don't even think about, we are not submitting to ideas and ethics that we ourselves have made, but are rather submitting ourselves to a type of behavior and a belief system that society has made over time. Society maintains a type of moral authority that is superior to the morality that any individual can alone create. So there is a submission to the moral authority that has developed over generations from societal cooperation that each individual submits to. Society depends upon individuals, and even if its nature is very distinct from individual nature, society has an ability to enter into our individuality and operate within our individuality. The force of society that feels somewhat foreign to the form of our individuality, this force of society thus becomes an important and integral part of our individual being. It is for this reason that society has the ability to lift ourselves beyond ourselves, that is to say, to bring us into a moral state that we would not have been able to produce ourselves. However, it has still entered into our individual selves, thus bringing us to a state that we would not have been able to reach on our own. Durkheim then goes over what he refers to as collective effervescence. This is a well-known term in sociology. To describe it, he is focusing on the ways in which totems are used by clans in their religious rituals, and claims that collective effervescence is a coming together of this clan in their ritual to then produce an emotional intensity of their human existence. A good description of collective effervescence can be found on page 213, when Durkheim writes, "Individuals seek one another and come together more. The result is the general effervescence that is characteristic of revolutionary or creative epochs. The result of that heightened activity is a general stimulation of individual energies. People live differently and more intensely than in normal times. The individual is stirred by passions so intense that they can be satisfied only by extreme acts. In all kinds of acts that express the understanding, esteem, and affection of his neighbor, there is a lift that the individual feels, usually without being aware of it, but that lift sustains him. The feeling of society has for him uplifts the feeling he has for himself because he is in moral harmony with his neighbor." So we see that collective effervescence, this really intense feeling that we don't feel on a daily basis, comes about when we come together with those with whom we share a collective belief system and a religious ritual that corresponds to this shared belief system. We have this lift together because we are having society operate through us, and we are experiencing a moral harmony with those in our social group. So some of the examples that Durkheim uses where the force of society operates within our individuality, we can say that we all speak a language, even though none of us have created the language that we speak. We use certain tools and instruments that we ourselves did not invent, and we claim legal rights that we never established. Our morality, the way we speak, the things we use, are all dependent on past societies and present societies and the cooperation of society, not our individual actions, but rather a collection of individual actions that have been in a state of interdependence. We thus feel in contact with two worlds, those being the profane and the sacred. Outlandish behavior captures us in the state of collective effervescence and makes us feel so far outside of our daily and individual routine. To exemplify this, I encourage you to turn to page 218, where Durkheim writes, "And by expressing this excitement, they also reinforce it. The effervescence often becomes so intense that it leads to outlandish behavior. The passions unleashed are so torrential that nothing can hold them. People are so far outside the ordinary conditions of life and so conscious of the fact that they feel a certain need to set themselves above and beyond ordinary morality. The sexes come together in violation of the rules governing sexual relations. Men exchange wives. Indeed, sometimes incestuous unions, in normal times judged loathsome and harshly condemned, are contracted in the open and with impunity." Later down the page, he writes, "They bring about such an intense hyper-excitement of physical and mental life as a whole that they cannot be borne for very long. The celebrant who takes the leading role eventually falls exhausted to the ground." So in this excited state, the individual does not feel like him or herself. It doesn't feel like you might feel when you are bored, when you are alone, when you are together with a group that share an identity and a belief system and a long tradition of rituals. You then feel these emotions that are completely different than the emotions that you feel when you are alone and when you are existing as an individual. Thus, you get the sense that two different worlds exist, the profane and the sacred, or are we talking about the individual and the social? Durkheim says that although the individual might believe that he or she is feeling this entirely separate mode of existence, this entirely distinct emotional intensity that is not familiar to their everyday life. They might believe that they're feeling so differently because they are in some sort of interaction with a supernatural world. It is a completely different experience because they believe that they are in connection with a world that is entirely different from the human world. But in reality, Durkheim claims, it is not really a cooperation with a different world that they are experiencing. The reason we feel so different in these matters is because society has a different nature that is operating within us that makes us feel far different and more intense than we would have felt as living as individuals. The force they feel lifts them that lifts them is not coming from a world that is actually sacred, but rather they are actually worshiping society. I will read a quote from page 223 on this matter. Because religious force is none other than the collective and anonymous force of the clan, and because that force can only be conceived of in the form of the totem, the totemic emblem is, so to speak, the visible body of the god. A little bit down the page, he goes on to write, so it is to the totem that the rites are specifically addressed. This is why the totem stands foremost in the ranks of sacred things. A little bit more down the page says, thus, insofar as religious force is conceived of as embodied in the totemic emblem, it seems to be external to individuals and endowed with a kind of transcendence. And yet, from another standpoint, and like the clan it symbolizes, it could be made real only within and by them. So in this sense, it is immanent in individual members, and they of necessity imagine it to be. They feel within themselves the active presence of the religious force, because it is this force that lifts them up to a higher level. So there's a moral force that the worshipper is submitting to, but when they think that this force might be a god, Durkheim claims it is actually society. Society feels distinct from our individual self, and God is the figurative representation of society. There are, of course, secular and modernized contexts where we can connect these concepts to. We could attribute social meanings to symbols such as a flag. A flag, for example, might stir intense emotions among those with pride in their country, though there is not necessarily intrinsic qualities of the flag. That is to say, it has little to do with what the texture of the flag might be, or even the design. Really, these are just symbols of some greater sensation, some greater meaning, and that is a social meaning. So he claims that representations are not mere delusions. These representations that people use when engaging in religious ritual should not be seen as sort of crazy hallucinations. It should not be seen as delusional for clans to, say, use pebbles in religious ritual, even if that might seem strange to those who do not take part in the ritual. For people in modernized and secularized societies constantly use symbol to establish social meanings. So, to reiterate, Durkheim claims that the God that one might think they are worshipping is actually themselves worshipping social harmony. Collective effervescence gives us a sense that there are two different modes of existence: the profane, individual world, and the sacred, the social world. The object of the worship, therefore, is unbeknownst to the worshipper.